The Arizona sun was a hammer over Death Canyon, a merciless, blinding force that baked the very air. It was 1878, and the heat had crested 110 degrees before the day had even properly begun. 5 riders cut through the shimmering sands, their mounts kicking up plumes of dust that haunted the air like wraiths. At the head of the column rode Colonel Ambrose Thorne, a man whose reputation was as vicious as the scar that twisted his face into a permanent sneer. He lifted a hand and the posse drew to a halt. Through the heat haze, his predator's gaze caught a flicker of movement on a distant ridge. "There," he snarled, pulling a new Winchester .73 from its saddle scabbard. The rifle was a thing of beauty and death, fresh from the factory with modifications only a man with deep government ties could procure. A rare telescopic sight promised to deliver judgment from a distance that defied belief. With practiced ease, he set the elevation, his mind a cold calculus of wind and distance. His breath steadied, his finger tightening on the trigger. The rifle's crack split the canyon's silence, and a far-off figure crumpled to the earth. "That's 4. 1 to go." Thorne lowered the weapon, a grim satisfaction settling on his features. "It's the chief's daughter. She has what we came for." The men dug their spurs in, their horses surging forward to close the distance on the fleeing Apache. Woman, Chenoa, daughter of the great Chief Victorio, ran with the raw terror of the hunted, knowing death was closing in. Her bare feet bled on the razor-sharp rocks, but she pressed on, her breath a ragged sob in her throat. Her people's future rode, on every agonizing step. 20 miles to the north, Silas Gunn knelt by a deer track, his focus absolute, a man reading the land like a book he'd known his entire life. At 40, he was lean and hard, the gray in his dark hair the only sign of the years. The Colt Peacemaker on his hip was a heavy, familiar weight, an 1873 model with a long barrel, its grip worn smooth by a hand that knew its business. 15. Years as a Union captain in the nation's bloodiest war had etched skills into his soul that no man should ever have to learn. How they kept him alive in this unforgiving country. His 50 head of cattle and the small ranch he'd built with his own hands gave him solitude. It was all he'd wanted after the killing was done. The distant report of rifle fire tore his eyes. From the trail, 4 quick shots, then a pause. Trouble. A muscle knotted in Silas's jaw. It wasn't his fight. He was done with other men's wars. But when the 5th shot echoed across the plains, something buried deep inside him broke loose. With a grunt, he swung onto his Appaloosa and spurred it toward the sound. Silas topped a ridge just as Chenoa stumbled into the clearing below. Her dark hair was a wild mane, her buckskin dress stained with blood. Exhaustion was carved into every line of her body, but her eyes blazed with defiance. A cornered wolf refusing to die. Behind her, a cloud of dust announced the coming storm. Silas's hand fell instinctively to the butt of his Colt. As the riders emerged, he saw the military precision in their formation. These were no common bounty. Hunters. Well, I'll be damned. The lead rider pulled his horse up, a cruel smile spreading across his scarred face. "Captain Silas Gunn. A long way from Antietam, ain't you, Union man?" Silas felt his blood turn to ice. "Thorne, I heard they hanged you for what you did at Yellow Creek." Thorne let out a laugh like grinding stone. "The government found my talents useful. Unlike you, I didn't turn my back on my duty." His eyes flickered to Chenoa. "Now step aside. This Apache witch is government business." 5 guns against 1 woman. Silas's voice was flat, hard. "Looks more like murder than business, to me. She's the last of Victorio's line. She carries secrets that could start the fires of resistance all over again." Thorne leaned forward. "Don't make this personal, Gunn. We both know what happens when you pick the losing side." The memory hit Silas like a physical blow. Smoke, screams, the sight of his farm burning, his wife and son inside. Thorne's men had branded them sympathizers, a convenient lie to steal their Tennessee land. "This ain't about sides anymore, Thorne." Silas moved his horse, placing himself between the riders and the girl. "It's about what kind of man I choose to be." Thorne's face hardened into a mask of stone. "Last chance, Captain. Stand down." Instead, Silas's hand became a blur of motion, the Colt clearing leather and spitting fire in a single, fluid act. Thorn's hat flew from his head, the bullet searing a fresh line across his temple. Blood streamed down his face as chaos erupted. 2 of Thorn's men were dead before their hands even found their guns, Silas's shots finding their marks with lethal certainty. The others broke for cover, their return fire kicking up dust around his horse's hooves. "Run!" Silas yelled to Chenoa, who was frozen in shock. "Northwest! To the ridge!" Understanding lit her eyes, and she bolted as Silas laid down a screen of covering fire. A bullet ripped through his sleeve, a kiss of hot lead against his flesh. But he barely felt it. He fired his last round, wheeled his horse and galloped after her, the sound of gunfire and thundering hooves fading behind them. Thorn's voice, raw with fury, chased them on the wind. "You're a dead man, Gun. We're coming for you both." Silas found Chenoa at the ridge, her chest heaving for air. Without a word, he offered his hand. She hesitated for a heartbeat before taking it, letting him pull her up onto the horse behind him. Her arms circled his waist, a bond forged of desperation, not trust. "They'll be back," Silas said, urging his horse onward. With more men. As they rode for the sanctuary of his ranch, the weight of his actions settled on him. He'd made an enemy, of a powerful man again. But this time there was no Union army at his back. This time he was alone. Except for the Apache woman clinging to him like a shadow. Whatever secret she was carrying, it had better be worth dying for. Because he had a feeling that's exactly what they were about to do. His ranch appeared as twilight bled across the sky, a simple cabin and barn tucked against the protective wall of a mesa. It wasn't much, but it was defensible. That was all that mattered now. He dismounted, helping Chenoa down before stabling his horse. "Wait here," he commanded, then vanished inside. He returned moments later with a medical kit and a canteen. Kneeling before her, he cleaned the cuts on her feet with a sharp mix of whiskey and water, his touch efficient, not gentle. She winced but remained silent. "You speak English?" he asked, binding her foot with a clean strip of cloth. She nodded. "The missionaries taught me." "Good, because I need to know what I just killed 2 men for." His eyes locked onto hers. "What does Thorn want from you?" Her face was an impassive mask, but her eyes darted to the horizon, where the dust of their pursuers still hung in the air. "Thorn will be back by morning with an army," Silas pressed. "If I'm to die protecting you, I have a right to know why." After a long, tense silence, she turned. She pulled back her hair and lowered the collar of her dress from her shoulder. Etched into her skin was not a tattoo, but something far more intricate. A map. The truth of it hit Silas like a fist to the gut. "My father was dying," she explained, her voice gaining strength despite her exhaustion. "Our people were scattered, hunted to the brink," she said, her voice steady. "My father entrusted this to me. It is the location of our strength, our weapons and our gold. 500 rifles with ammunition to feed them. 5 tons of gold gathered from raids and from trade." Silas let out a low whistle. "Enough to arm every last Apache warrior and buy half of Mexico, or enough to buy peace, and a piece of land to call your own." "My father believed a people should be prepared for both," Chenoa countered. Inside the cabin, Silas lit a lantern and crossed to a worn rug in the corner. He threw it aside, revealing a heavy trap door. His own insurance policy, built years ago, against the very people he was now protecting. The irony was not lost on him. "Down there," he gestured. "It's stocked with supplies. If anyone comes, you stay hidden." As night fell, Silas turned the ranch into a fortress. He set tripwires, positioned caches of ammunition, and calculated every deadly line of sight. The grim preparations of war returned to him as naturally as breathing. Dawn was just a rumor on the horizon when the sound of hoofbeats reached him. Silas tensed, his rifle in hand, but relaxed a fraction when he recognized the rider. It was Marshal Tate, his old sergeant. "You've gone and kicked the hornet's nest this time, Captain," Tate said, his voice gravelly as he dismounted. At 55, every movement was a protest from his joints, but his eyes were as sharp as ever. "Thorn's in town, hiring every gun he can find. Says you murdered government men and abducted an Apache prisoner. Is that what you believe? Silas asked. Tate spat on the ground. I believe Thorne is the same snake I saw at Shiloh. But he's got papers from Washington, Silas, signed by senators. Whatever game he's playing, he's got powerful friends. It's about the land, Silas said. Always is. Tate nodded grimly. Railroads coming through. And they found new copper deposits south of here. Suddenly all those treaties with the Apache ain't worth the ink they're signed with. Thorne is the man. They send to clean house and now he's got a personal score to settle with you. He glanced toward the cabin. Where is she? Safer if you don't know. Smart. Tate handed Silas a heavy cloth package. Extra ammunition. It's all I could sneak out. He swung back onto his horse. They'll come at nightfall. Expect 20 men, at least. After the marshal left, Silas went back inside and opened the trap door. Chenoa emerged, the look on her face confirming she had heard it all. You should leave, she said softly. This isn't your fight. It became my fight the moment I drew on Thorne. Silas began to methodically clean his rifle, the movements practiced and calming. Besides, I've spent enough years running from men like him. Maybe it's time I stopped. As the sun began to die, Silas positioned Chenoa at a rear window with his shotgun. Aim low, he instructed. You don't have to hit a damn thing. Just make noise and keep their heads down. Night fell like a black shroud. The desert's heat gave way to a chilling cold as the stars appeared with a cruel, diamond-like clarity. Silas felt the attack before he saw it, a subtle shift in the night's rhythm, a tension in the air you could taste. The first shot shattered the cabin window, spraying him with glass. He hit the floor as bullets tore through the wooden walls around him. He returned fire into the darkness, and a shadowy figure cried out and fell. Fire and move, he yelled to Chenoa, who blasted the shotgun out the back window before ducking low. The cabin became a symphony of chaos. Muzzle flashes lit the room in strobing, hellish bursts, the thunder of gunfire a deafening roar. Silas moved from window to window, a ghost in the dark, firing and relocating, never giving them a fixed target. A stick of dynamite landed on the porch, the explosion shaking the foundation but doing little real damage. In a brief lull, a flicker of movement at the edge of his vision caught his eye. A lone figure was breaking off, circling toward the back of the cabin. Thorne. Even in the dark, the silhouette was unmistakable. Chenoa, behind you. He scrambled across the floor just as the back door splintered and burst inward. Thorne stood, there, rifle raised. The lamplight glinted off his face, revealing something Silas hadn't seen before. A silver half-mask covering his left side, gleaming like a sliver of the moon. Silas fired, but his shot went wide as a hammer of pain slammed into his shoulder. A bullet from outside had found him. Thorne closed the distance in 2 strides, swinging his rifle like a club. The butt smashed into Silas's jaw with brutal force, and the world exploded into stars. As he stumbled back, Thorne leveled his rifle at his chest. Should have minded your own business, Captain. The blast of the shotgun was a deafening surprise. Chenoa stood in the corner, Marshal Tate's shotgun smoking in her hands. The force of the buckshot threw Thorne against the wall. His silver mask clattered to the floor, revealing the horror beneath. A landscape of melted, warped flesh, the ruin of some terrible, old injury. He howled, a sound of pure rage and agony, clutching his bloody side. With a strength born of pure hatred, he lunged for Chenoa. Silas intercepted him, driving his hunting knife deep into Thorne's thigh. The colonel crashed down but kicked out with his good leg, sending Silas sprawling. Burn it! Thorne shrieked to his men outside. Burn it, all. Flaming arrows arced through the windows, and the dry wood of the cabin caught fire with terrifying speed. Smoke began to choke the air. The trap door, Silas gasped, blood pouring from his shoulder. Now! Together they dragged the wounded colonel to the hidden cellar, using his body as a shield against the bullets still ripping through the walls. As flames licked up the cabin walls, they dropped into the darkness below, pulling the heavy door shut above them. In the cramped cellar, Silas worked by lantern light, binding Thorne's wounds just enough to keep him alive. but not enough to make him comfortable. "They think we're dead," Silas said. "Let's keep it that way." Thorn laughed, a rattling sound of pain. "There's nowhere to hide, Gun. This territory belongs to progress now. The Apache are finished." "Why the mask?" Silas asked, ignoring the taunt. Thorn's ruined face contorted. "A gift from your Apache friends. A raiding party back in 71. They took my face. I took their future." "You were hunting them long before that," Silas said. "I remember Yellow Creek. Just following orders." Thorn's eyes then shifted to Chenoa. "But this is personal. A narrow tunnel, an emergency escape route Silas had dug years ago, led from the cellar to an opening in the mesa. As the new dawn broke, they emerged to the site of their smoldering, ruined ranch. Thorn's men were gone, convinced their targets had burned with the cabin. Chenoa touched Silas's arm. "You've lost everything." "Things," he corrected her, his voice rough. "Just things." He looked at Thorn, now bound and gagged. "But we've gained leverage." 3 days later, in a hidden cave, a scout named Mangus arrived, sent by Marshal Tate. He brought supplies and grim news. The territorial governor had put a bounty on Silas's head, dead or alive. Thorn's influence ran deep. "There's more," Mangus said, his face grave. "An army patrol is headed this way, 50 men." That night, as Chenoa dressed Silas's shoulder wound, she spoke quietly. "Why did you help me? Our peoples have been enemies for a lifetime." Silas stared into the flames of their small fire. "In the war, I followed orders I knew were wrong. I watched innocent people die because a man with stripes on his sleeve said it was necessary." He looked up, his eyes meeting hers in the firelight. "I swore to myself that I would never again let another man decide what kind of man I am." Studied his face for a long moment, then reached for a small pouch at her waist. From it, she took a pinch of red ochre, mixing it with water in the palm of her hand. "In my tribe," she explained, her voice low, "a warrior's strength is not in his weapon but in his spirit." She drew a finger through the cool paste and traced a single, solemn line across Silas's forehead. "This marks you, one who has seen death and chosen life." The sudden intimacy of the moment was shattered by Mangus's urgent return. "Riders coming, not soldiers from another direction." Silas grabbed for his rifle, but Mangus was already moving, his knife already drawn. Not for the riders, but for Silas himself. The blade was a wicked flash in the firelight. "Mangus, what in the hell?" "Thorn offered gold," the scout said, his face a cold, hard mask. "More than you could ever pay." Silas dodged the first wild slash, the cave's tight space leaving no room to maneuver. The knife bit through his shirt, leaving a line of fire across his ribs. They slammed together against the rock wall, a desperate grapple for control of the blade. Mangus was younger, stronger, but Silas fought with the grim efficiency of a man who had survived 100 such brutal embraces. His thumbs found the scout's windpipe, pressing with a cold, calculated force. Mangus's eyes bulged, his breath stolen from him. The knife clattered to the cave floor. With a final vicious twist, Silas felt something snap beneath his hands. Mangus collapsed, his eyes staring into nothing. Chenoa had already cut Colonel Thorn's bonds, pressing his own knife to his throat. "One sound," she whispered, her voice like ice, "and I will finish what the fire started." "We have to move," Silas said, his voice ragged as he gathered their scant supplies. "Now." They slipped out of the cave and into the oppressive darkness, Thorn stumbling between them, an unwilling shield and their only guide into the most god-forsaken territory in the land, a place the locals called the Deadland. It stretched before them like a landscape from a nightmare, a sun-blasted maze of rock, treacherous canyons, and shifting sands where even native guides refused to tread. No water, no shelter, only legends of vengeful spirits that preyed on lost travelers. It was the perfect place for 3 people to vanish from the earth. "We'll die out here," Thorn rasped, limping, his festering wounds leaving him weak with fever. "The Apache call this the punishment grounds. Nothing survives." "You'd better hope that ain't true," Silas shot back, scanning the empty horizon. "Because you're our map through it." They traveled by night, when the temperature plummeted to freezing and hid from the blistering sun during the day. Silas called upon every hard-learned survival trick from the war, collecting dew on cloth, digging for moisture in dry riverbeds, setting false trails to throw off anyone who might follow. Chenoa brought the wisdom of her people, showing him which plants held water, how to navigate by stars strange to a white man, and how to mask their scent from tracking hounds. Out of necessity, a partnership of respect began to grow. On the third day, from the shadow of a rock overhang, Silas saw dust on the horizon. It was not the aimless swirl of the desert wind, but the disciplined cloud of many horses moving with a single purpose. "They found us," he said, his voice grim. Chenoa's eyes narrowed. "How many?" Silas studied the approaching column through Thorne's confiscated field glasses. The sight turned his blood to ice. "Not bounty hunters." His voice was a hollow whisper. "It's the army, a full company, 80 men at least." Thorne let out a wet, sickly laugh. "I told you. This was never just about one Apache woman or a disgraced captain. The territory is changing. New borders are being drawn." "What does that mean?" Silas demanded. "The railroad needs this pass." Thorne coughed, flecks of blood on his lips. "The new copper mine needs cheap labor. The Apache reservation is in the way of both. It's progress, Gun. You can't stop it." "A massacre," Silas whispered, the horrible truth dawning on him. "They're going to wipe them all out. Blame it on renegades." "And you're leading them to the last of our people?" Chenoa accused Thorne, her voice dripping with contempt. The colonel's fever-bright eyes met hers. "Your father's war party killed my brother at Salt River. I watched him burn alive. This isn't business anymore, it's justice." Silas checked his ammunition. 26 rounds for the rifle, 12 for the revolver. It was next to nothing. "We have to split them up," he decided, his voice hard. "I'll create a diversion. Draw them south. Chenoa, you take Thorne and get to your people. Warn them." She shook her head. "They won't believe him. They'll kill him on sight. Then you tell them what's coming. Get them out. Get them across the border into Mexico." Night fell, heavy with the promise of blood. As Silas cleaned his weapons for what he knew was a suicide mission, Chenoa approached him with a small leather pouch. "An Apache warrior prepares for death by carrying a piece of his home with him," she explained, placing a pinch of dirt into the pouch and hanging it around his neck. "So, his spirit can find its way back." The simple gesture touched a part of Silas he thought had long since died. In that moment he knew he wasn't just fighting for one woman's life. He was fighting for the right to choose a path, to stand against the crushing, relentless march of so-called progress. "I'll find you," he promised, a lie they both knew he was telling. What happened over the next 3 days, Army reports would later call the Phantom Massacre. A single man, using the guerrilla tactics of the Civil War's bloodiest campaigns, systematically broke the advance of an entire cavalry company. Silas Gunn became a ghost. He struck from nowhere, picking off scouts and sentries. He rigged ravines, with deadfalls of rock that crushed men and horses alike. He lit false campfires that lured soldiers into deadly ambushes. He turned the land itself into a weapon, leading his pursuers into sucking quicksand and narrow passes where one man with a rifle could hold off 50. For 3 days and nights he fought, taking 2 bullets for his trouble but refusing to fall, his body running on nothing but pure will. Meanwhile, Chenoa forced the delirious Colonel Thorne across the punishing terrain, dragging him toward the hidden Apache sanctuary. "Why, keep me alive?" he gasped during one brief rest. "Vengeance is your way. My father believed in tomorrow more than he believed in yesterday," she answered, her voice cold. "You are the proof of what is coming. They will believe you." They reached the hidden valley at dawn on the 4th day, a green, impossible oasis, tucked between towering cliffs, accessible only by a single narrow trail that a handful of warriors could defend against an army. 200 Apache survivors had made their last stand here, with gardens, livestock, and fortifications. Warriors surrounded them instantly, their weapons ready. Thorne, lost in his fever, saw only enemies. Chenoa saw her family. She spoke rapidly, In her native tongue, the words tumbling out. The army, Silas's sacrifice, Thorn's plan for their extermination. The tribal elders listened, their faces like stone, then turned to the captive colonel. "Is this true?" the oldest among them asked, in perfect English. "Your government means to wipe us from the earth like words written in sand?" Thorn, at the foot of his grave, found no more room for lies. "New railroad, new mines," he rasped. "Old promises mean nothing against that kind of money." His honesty did not save him, but it gave his death a purpose. Instead, they granted him the mercy of a warrior's end, a final acknowledgement that even a hated enemy could be a vessel for truth. As the last of the Apache prepared for their exodus to Mexico, a sentry brought startling news. A lone rider, more spirit than man, was approaching. Silas Gunn arrived at the hidden valley, barely clinging to consciousness, his horse stumbling from exhaustion. His clothes were a stiff collage of dried blood from at least 3 different wounds. He had fought an army to a standstill, then bled his way through their broken lines to find this place. The Apache medicine men worked through the long night, their ancient knowledge mingling with supplies pilfered from army posts, to pull him back from the brink. For 7 days, he drifted in the gray twilight between worlds, his body consumed by a feverish war against infection. When he finally opened his eyes, Chenoa was there. "Your diversion worked," she said, her voice soft. "Most of our people are already across the border. The rest of us leave tomorrow." Silas nodded weakly. "Good. The army thinks you died in the canyons," she continued, taking his hand. "Marshal, Tate identified a body as yours. In the eyes of your world, Silas Gunn no longer exists." The weight of her words settled over him, slow and heavy. No ranch to go back to, no country that would claim him. The man he had been was dead and buried. "What happens now?" he asked. "Now you choose," she replied, her gaze steady. "You can leave when you are strong, return to a world that believes you are a ghost. Or you can become someone new. Come with us. My people have need of a man who understands both worlds, a warrior who chooses his own path." 3 weeks later, a band of Apache crossed the border into the mountains of Mexico, the last free remnants of a nation being systematically erased. Among them rode a white man, his wounds beginning to heal, his eyes haunted by all he had seen. The Apache gave him a new name, Ghost Warrior, for the way he had appeared from the dust of battle and for the enemies who had fallen before him like phantoms. The army never found Victorio's gold or weapons. The railroad in time carved another path through the mountains. The copper mines opened, their shafts worked by imported labor. Progress, as it always does, marched on, its history written over the stories of those who dared to stand in its way. But in the high Sierras of northern Mexico, a new legend took root, a legend of Apache warriors who fought with the deadly tactics of the white man's greatest war, of a former Union officer who found his honor only after turning his back on a nation that had lost its own, of a people who survived because one man decided that some lines, drawn in the name of civilization, must never be crossed. In time, Silas's wounds scarred over. His soul took longer, but in the fierce protection of a people not his own, he found purpose. In teaching a new generation of warriors how to defend themselves against a changing world, he found meaning. And in the eyes of a woman who had lost everything but her will to endure, he found something he thought had been burned to ashes with his family back in Tennessee. He found hope. Sometimes, in the gathering dusk, Silas would stand at the edge of their mountain sanctuary and look north, toward the country he had once served. He felt no longing, only a quiet, settled understanding that a man's true nation is not a border drawn on a map, but a principle held in the heart.